Hello and welcome to a very special Black Friday week edition of the Showdown Show. I, of course, am Adam Levitan of Established the Run. I am joined, as always, by Mike Leone, who has a never-ending closet full of jerseys to represent the teams in each showdown. And I'm joined by Drew Dinkmeyer as well, who is deep in the NBA cave. He's been fleeting, which I have to get to in a second. But first, Leone, whose jersey is this today and what's going on?
It's Isaac Bruce. I have an affinity for 1990s decade jerseys, both the style and the players. So this is a new edition. I got one ready for Thanksgiving too that I just got. So that'll be showing on the Wednesday ETR Established the Millie show with Dink.
Yes. Before there was the Chiefs, for you guys that may be a little bit younger, there was the greatest show on turf with this Rams team with Torrey Holt and Isaac Bruce. Azahir Hakeem, I believe was his name, was like in the Mecole Hardman role. And so yeah, that was a fun team back in the day. Drew, the biggest upset of 2020.
I think Oz actually got on the field though, so I don't think it was the Mecole Hardman role. I think it might be maybe the Byron Pringle role. I don't know, but it's I don't think it's the Hardman role.
Drew, the biggest upset of 2020. There's been a lot of things that happened in 2020. The biggest upset is the frequency at which you're fleeting, and I feel like these fleets are deadpan, half joking, half serious, although I can't tell exactly. How's it going today?
It's going great. I'm just, I'm finding my footing with my fleets, just, trying to be authentic and genuine. I've heard from some newsletters around the industry that that's really the way to grow the brand, and just trying to have fun with it and keep the people informed, make sure they know where to get their merch this week.
Did you just pass up an opportunity to say you were finding your fleeting?
I may have missed opportunity for sure.
Yes, very important. Anyways, Drew is gracing us with his presence for the Showdown show because he is deep in the NBA cave. Obviously, the draft happened, free agency happened. They're running this season back extremely quickly. We will have news in the next 7 to 10 days on NBA product, NBA pricing, and all that. I know you guys are waiting. Be patient. It's coming. However, today is the beginning of our very special Black Friday week here at Establish the Run. What does that mean? I know you are dying to know what that means. Well, first, it means a bunch of free content on YouTube like this. We will have 4 shows here on YouTube, 4 free shows over the next 3 days. Be sure to smash, don't tap, smash the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you know when we go live. Also, Black Friday week means that one of the best sales we have ever offered. It is just $5 for a weekly subscription, $40 for a monthly, $99 for rest of the season, which means through week 17 and also through the Super Bowl. So you can find all the promo codes for that. Just go to establishedrun.com, the subscribe page. Everything is up there that you need. Also, we know a lot of Black Friday sales and stuff caters to non-subscribers and people who aren't familiar with the brand. However, we didn't want to forget about our current customers. So we are released the merch for the first time. We do not have any Team Sex shirts. We do not have any motherfucking Mackey Award shirts. However, we do have Run the Damn Ball shirts. We do have Established the Run shirts, and they're available to subscribers only. Head to the site there. You'll see an article with a link that you can take you to get the merch. Okay. On this show, we're going to briefly talk about yesterday's slate, and then we're going to get into tonight's Rams at Bucks showdown slate. I don't want to spend too much time on yesterday because we do have a lot to get to, but themes and takeaways from yesterday. I thought it was really interesting that without all the stud quarterbacks on the slate, a lot of people migrated towards Lamar, which I expected. Taysom kind of messed things up at quarterback, but it was really Justin Herbert who you needed, I think, because Herbert worked so well with the doubles. And so Herbert, with the bring back of Perriman or Mims, even though they didn't smash, were so cheap and so good that you were able to do some good stuff there. Drew, what did you think were the biggest themes or takeaways or anything you learned from yesterday's main slate?
Yeah, one of the big takeaways that we had kind of going into the Establish the Million show was the idea that we had so many fewer of the elite quarterbacks available to us on the slate. And as a result, I ended up sort of spreading out my quarterback exposure a little bit more and took some risks on the lower end of the spectrum, played some Andy Dalton as well, which I felt pretty good about the result. But looking back, it's almost like, man, maybe I should have just condensed onto the 2 guys in Justin Herbert and Deshaun Watson that are the guys that were left over from kind of that bunch along with Lamar. And I feel like it was a little bit of a missed opportunity for me. Definitely the cheap end of the quarterbacks with Taysom Hill, PJ Walker, and some of those options, I think muddied the waters a little bit for me. But it's just a good reminder that these quarterbacks are really separating this year, unlike many years in the past from the cheap counterparts. And so Taysom was able to get there with his legs, and still Herbert was able to kind of beat him. So I think it's a good reminder to really emphasize that correlation. There's a lot of value to it. We saw it with Herbert doubles. You could bring back with Perryman or even Mims. Mims was so cheap that it worked out. And I felt like it was a little bit of a missed opportunity. I played that Jets-Chiefs game pretty hard a few weeks back. And I think this Chargers-Jets game was pretty similar, with the exception of the Chargers, any game they play, is going to be within one score with 3 minutes left. So you knew the Jets had to get there some way, shape, or form. That was going to be the case.
Yeah. If you have more macro stuff, Leone, go ahead. I was going to ask about a couple of projection-based things that I thought, but go ahead.
I felt pretty good about my team in the Thunderdome. Like, structurally, I was the exact same as the team that won. I just had the Pittsburgh stack instead of the Chargers stack. To Drew's point, I kind of galaxy brained myself into thinking the Chargers stack might be higher owned than it was. This is a really small field, but the ownerships did kind of align with what they were elsewhere. Keenan would be slightly chalky, but he didn't get, squeezed or he didn't get to the point. Sometimes in these small fields, these guys really get inflated, and he didn't get inflated. He kind of stayed the same at 25%. Herbert was like very secondary chalk outside of the top three, and Mike Williams was low. And then you had the cheap bring back. So structurally, I felt good about the way I played, but I did not play the Herbert stack, which, in retrospect, just seems like a better version of the Pittsburgh stack, because the defense it's more likely the Jets would be able to put up some points, I think, against the Chargers defense than it is the Jags against the Steelers defense.
Yeah, matchup of two elite quarterbacks. You gotta play that game over and over again.
Shout out to you guys. I actually had a team that would have won the Thunderdome. Shout out to me with Justin Herbert, a Herbert double. And then, I was thinking about how can I get leverage off of both Dalvin and Justin Jefferson. So I played Thielen in there. And then what I wanted to ask you about, Leone, was kind of these landmines at running back. Because sometimes when we get these projections on running backs, i.e. Gio, i.e. Duke Johnson, it's like, I feel like they're super, super fragile. And it's like these guys are never making big plays, right? Like, you need to pray that they get 3 or 4 catches, and need to pray that they somehow squeeze their way to like 70 yards and a touchdown. And at 5.6K, it's like, God, I can play Deontay Johnson. I can play Amari Cooper. I can play Tyler Boyd. I can play Brandon Cooks. I can play any of these 5K wide receivers. How am I misreading this, that when these projections between the 5K running backs and wide receivers come in the same, that I'm for ceiling, at least for tournaments, and even in cash lately, I've been leaning like, God, just let me take one of these wide receivers, and for the love of God, let him break a big play instead of trying to grind out 4 yards at a time here with Duke Johnson.
Is that why you took Kalen Ballage over Justin Jefferson?
Yes. And also, I wanted to mention that I think, and this is one thing that can happen with guys we don't know about, like Salvon Ahmed, he didn't show a pass catching role in his first 2 NFL games. Doesn't mean he can't do it though, but it was really hard to project him for that. You know what I mean? And so Ahmed was like almost unowned in cash. And I think that's almost solely due to projection based, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, go.
Yeah. And I think we had that wrong to start the week. And then, this is why you watch the content. Me as a projections guy watching you and Silva talk through it. Silva pointed out that he does have pass catching chops, and we basically doubled his target share when we updated the projections on Saturday. So, but I think in general, you're right that especially when the chalk's going to be there on these fragile middle-ish running backs, you really, that was basically my flag plan of the week, was like, don't play these guys, at least the ones that are going to be owned. I do think the one that you played in cash made the most sense, Ballage, because he had the best chance to have like this really well-rounded workload on a team that could put up a lot of points. But, what I did was I faded all those guys, and we didn't have a bunch of expensive receivers to jam in this week. I mean, you had Keenan and Devontae, but last week we had like 8 to 10 expensive receivers you could play. So it was a little bit easier to play one expensive receiver and then get some cap relief on some other receivers. And I thought receiver was priced a bit looser this week too, which is another thing that allowed you to go up at running back. Not that it hit in a huge way, but I thought the ownership on Aaron Jones was way too low. And something Dick and I talked a lot about was you could start a lot of your lineups with Dalvin Cook and a cheap Dallas piece. In fact, Dalvin Gallup was an exact pivot to Adam Thielen, Ezekiel Elliott. I know we had a subscriber who made that switch because they weren't off to a hot start. They made that switch. You pick up a lot of ceiling, a lot of leverage on the field, and you can kind of salvage your week. So it was another showing of late swap. 2 weeks in a row, late swaps played a pretty big role in things, and it certainly will. Again, something Dick and I will talk through Wednesday's show for the 3-game Thanksgiving slate.
Yep. Okay. Enough's enough. The people want the plays. The people want the showdown. They want to win $1 million tonight. Shout out to all of them. This is a matchup of what I think is two of the better defenses as a whole in the league. And, I don't want to get too far into wide receiver cornerback matchups. Jalen Ramsey has been excellent, but the Rams pass defense as a whole against perimeter wide receivers has just been absolutely excellent. Jalen Ramsey is obviously a big part of that. Same with the Bucks defense has been pretty smothering against perimeter wide receivers. Also, Bucks have also been excellent against the run. Still, we get a big total here in this game. So, Drew, just from a macro perspective, from a high level perspective, two good defenses, but a pretty high total. How do you see the overall view of this showdown slate?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit tricky, and it's two offenses also that we've talked about the Bucks before in these primetime slots on Monday night, but they spread the ball out so much, and then the Rams can have these games where they just get so run heavy that it saps the life out of the fantasy value of the game. And I think it's interesting to see such a high total associated with this game, given the strength of the two defenses. I think that suggests that they think both teams will try to execute through the air more consistently and kind of run more plays and have less of a winding clock. Be really interesting to see, but I think this is the exact type of showdown slate that you want to almost play different lineups for different scripts. So almost, run lineup sets with the assumption that this game is going to be much lower scoring than the total, and what kind of lineups would work in that context. That might introduce some more of the defenses. It might introduce some more of the running backs in kind of low scoring slates, and then, run some lineups with the assumption that the game is going to kind of live up to its total. And that might lead to, using the pass catchers a little bit more heavily. But I think it's really situational lineups is really like, you got to tell yourself a story on how to build a lineup for the narrative of this game.
Yes. Tell yourself a story. Leone, go ahead on the overall context of this slate.
Yeah, I did bring up a chart here. It's pass rate over expectation. The Bucks have slid into the top 5 on the season. So I think that's a good sign for, some scoring production there. And the Rams kind of play things a little bit more middle of the pack. As Drew said, they do want to grind the clock if they can, but as underdogs in this game, they might not have that opportunity. It might be forced into a bit of a pass heavier script. The Brady slates are tough, right? Because generally you would say a quarterback like Brady with very little rushing equity is a bad captain choice, an over-owned captain choice. But we've seen a situation here where the Bucks have spread the ball out so much. Over the last 4 games, there's not a single player with a target share of even 18% or higher. Chris Godwin, over their last 4 games, he played 3 of them, had a 17% target share and was the leader. So with him spreading it out so much, it does bring him into play for captain, which is a bit odd. I still think our initial ownership projections and the captain projection has the quarterbacks over-owned, and there's a good chance that you see a receiver at lower ownership kind of sneak into a better captain lineup.
Yeah, I will say this on Jared Goff. Throughout his career, been one of the most pressure-sensitive quarterbacks in the entire NFL. Bucks have had one of the best pass rushes in the NFL. It just doesn't set up well to me for Jared Goff to have a good game here. And so as much as I respect the Rams D, I do think that it's a better spot just on paper for Brady. One other thing about this slate is there's not much of the cheap options, Drew. And so the cheapest guy that I think is reasonably in play is Gerald Everett at 2,600. So you don't get I know we had Lamar Miller. We've had a few $600 guys over the last few showdowns, $200 guys that have at least been in play. You can maybe give them 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 points. On this one, 2,600 is the cheapest. How does that change showdown slates when there's really no punts available to you below 2,600?
Yeah, it really puts pressure on the overall lineup construction for sure. Even last night in a game where you had so many kind of higher priced guys because the Chiefs were on the slate, you still had Le'Veon Bell at 1,400 or something like that freed up a bunch of salary relief. And so when you're getting into the 2s, it's the cheapest guy that you'd reasonably play. What you're going to see is a lot more kicker ownership. You're going to see the players that are around the 2-3 area garner more ownership, and you're going to see some of the high-end prices guys, the ownership come down a little bit just because there aren't really good ways to fill them out. It also makes the slate just a little bit more vulnerable to that random touchdown on like a 1 or 2% owned guy, which if you're playing showdown slates at this point, you should understand that there's a lot of value in being unique and different in showdown slates, especially in the really big contests, the really big MME structures. So if there's anybody that we think is going to play on the field, greater than like 10 snaps or around there, they're in play at like below that Gerald Everett price, just because if they run into the random play that's even like a 40, 50 yard play, that could be enough with the higher price combinations.
Yeah, and you see Leone highlighting some of those guys there. I don't mean to say that they're not in play for large field tournaments. I mean, they're not in play as guys that I would actually like consider in real, smaller field lineups. Go ahead, Leone.
It's rougher than usual for sure. On another slate, Tyler Johnson would be 200, but because he played a little bit more earlier in the year before they got these guys healthy, before they had Antonio Brown, I think it's propped him and Scotty Miller up a bit. So Van Jefferson kind of sticks out at 600. He's been buried recently behind Josh Reynolds. Josh Reynolds has really escalated, but he's probably the best there. And the third tight ends is like super risky, but Munt has played some snaps for the Rams, and I think it's Anthony Auclair is going to be the third tight end for the Bucs with Hudson out. Rest in peace to your boy there, Adam, Tanner Hudson. We don't get him. But those are, very thin MME type plays. It's definitely rougher than usual. But because of that too, and to reiterate, the quarterbacks in the captain spot, like that also reduces chances they get there because they're really expensive. They're the two most expensive players on the slate. So to get the receivers even a little bit less expensive, or even Leonard Fournette as a guy our projections really likes and sees as an under-owned captain to let you get in the passing games and get in some passing stacks elsewhere makes a lot of sense in captain tonight.
Okay, you mentioned Leonard Fournette. Let's talk about the running backs because I do think it's super interesting tonight. Leonard Fournette has had the quote-unquote James White role for Tom Brady, which I never thought I would have said about Leonard Fournette after calling him Fat Len for the last 2 years. But he has the James White role, i.e. when they're in 2 minute, when they're in 4 minute, when they are in third and long, it has been Leonard Fournette. Now, on early downs, they've shown a big commitment to Ronald Jones lately. Ronald Jones fumbled last week. Bruce Arians said, hey, you're going right back out there. Ronald Jones ends up with a big game, including, I think it was like a 98-yard touchdown run. Still, the way that you find a ceiling typically in fantasy with running backs is through targets and is through goal line work. I think Leonard Fournette at least has a chance at a share of the goal line work and all of the pass down work. So I understand why he's projecting well. I agree that I like him as one of the best values on the slate, only 4,400, where everybody else you could maybe make a case is priced pretty appropriately. So Leone, how are we doing projections at running back for Tampa? And then you can also go into the running backs for LA.
Yeah, we have, the breakdown in terms of carries is like 58-42 in favor of Ronald Jones, but we do think Leonard Fournette has enough of an edge in the passing down role that they essentially project about the same. And that leaves Ronald Jones overpriced at double the price of Leonard Fournette. And I think because of the recent success, people are going to look to Jones. Now, Jones will catch a little bit out of the backfield on early downs, but we've seen Fournette have a double-digit target share of the last 4 games. So I like him quite a bit. And then the Rams side, we often talk about sometimes when you get 3 guys clustered like this, it's unlikely the distribution of points works out exactly like this in a game. One of these guys is probably going to emerge and beat their projection by a decent bit. Another guy fall below. If we knew ahead of time who it would be, we would just project it that way, but we don't. There is some silver lining to Cam Akers. Seen his snaps up a little bit last week. He did lead the team in carries last week, but even with those snaps being up, he was third on the team in snaps, and his target share on the season is below 1%. And that's surprising because he was used as a pass catcher in college, but that's really hurting his value that they don't throw their backs all that often, but in particular, Akers hasn't been used out of the backfield.
Yeah, Drew, we see this, and I've been paralyzed with this too, with the Deontay Johnson thing. Like I was deciding between Ballage and Justin Jefferson, and somebody sent me a tweet this morning that was like, gosh, you were considering Ballage and Justin Jefferson. You never even considered Deontay Johnson. And I was like, you know what? I was just like, Deontay Johnson's only a tournament play because I don't know when it's going to be Claypool's day, when it's going to be Juju's day, when Ben is going to come down to 30 attempts or whatever, maybe against the Jaguars. But man, I get paralyzed by these situations where we can't decide and they don't look great in projections because like Leone said, we can't give one of the guys a huge bump. We don't know for sure. How do you handle things like Rams running back and Steelers wide receiver?
I think, those are really good opportunities in tournaments. And I've pretty much been hammering the Steelers wide receivers in tournaments the last few weeks. Claypool was a flag plan a few weeks ago, and it's because it's known that a lot of people are utilizing projection systems to help facilitate making lineups. And as a result, because there are spike weeks available among the trio, but not being able to identify them, you get more modest ownership. I don't think we've really had them at insane ownerships since Claypool has emerged. Right before Claypool was there, we did get some Deontay Johnson things. I would say Deontay Johnson's cash game viability has also been impacted by leaving 2 games like 1 snap in, giving the old Justin Jackson special. This in particular in this game, I think the one thing to recognize with the Rams running backs is the fact that because they're priced so much cheaper than all the other skill players on the slate, like Darrell Henderson's 5,800, Malcolm Brown's 5,400, Akers, I guess Fournette is really the guy in that range as well. There is an upside to them that's a little bit different if they hit right. Now, if they hit right, though, you also have to realize that that's probably coming in a game script that is also going to de-emphasize the pass catchers for the Rams substantially because they're splitting so much work. So if you're using Darrell Henderson in lineups or Malcolm Brown in lineups or even Cam Akers in lineups, you might want to restrict or limit the number of overall Rams you're using in that lineup, just because if those guys pay off in a way that is really substantial. Now, Akers is different because he's so cheap, but if those guys pay off in a way that's really substantial and you're using them at like captain or something like that, it's probably in a way that is limiting some of the volume from the other Rams pass catchers, unless you think the Rams just absolutely steamroll the Bucs in this game.
Yeah. We saw some change in usage with the Rams running backs. Last time we saw them play, Cam Akers actually led them in carries, which was a surprise. They've been using D. Hendo and Malcolm Brown so much. Wide receiver, I got to talk about Antonio Brown, man. I mean, I think this dude is like maybe bipolar, definitely like mentally ill in some sense. Tom Brady invites this dude into his home with his family. Now, I know we've had the shower narrative fail before, but when you invite a dude like Antonio Brown into your home, you clearly like him a lot. And obviously, I don't think the Bucs even wanted him. Tom Brady said, hey, go out and get this guy for me. You know he's throwing the football. So I've been encouraged by the way they've used Antonio Brown since he's arrived in Tampa. I'm not surprised given what's happened off the field between Brady and Antonio Brown. They have like some weird thing going on. So let's talk wide receivers, Leone. I think Mike Evans is going to be shadowed by Jalen Ramsey. Doesn't mean he can't win, but we have seen Tom Brady not feature Mike Evans a ton, and now he's going to have Jalen Ramsey. I do think Godwin and Antonio Brown are a little bit better, especially at cost. What do you think about wide receivers on the Bucs and then the Rams?
Yeah, in terms of pure value, I think I agree. You know, Brown didn't play a ton of snaps last week, but he's being targeted so heavily when he's out there. He was still second on the team with 8 targets. It was a surprising big target game for Evans last week, but in general, you know, Godwin's been the safest guy in terms of targets, and that's even before you count for any wide receiver cornerback matchup potentially factoring in there. So I agree that at cost, Brown and Godwin are the better plays. We basically have Brown and Evans projected the same, and then Godwin above. The Rams receivers are interesting. I think you kind of want to bet on a Robert Woods bounce back game where he might get overlooked a little bit because Cooper Kupp's been kind of the alpha there, and Josh Reynolds has actually been out targeting Woods as of late. So it sort of comes down to whether or not you think Reynolds out targeting Woods over their last 4 games or so is, you know, this definable trend, or if it's something that's going to revert back. You know, over the last 3 games, Reynolds actually has 8 more targets than Woods. You know, we don't have it. We have it projected almost the opposite way because longer term we believe in Woods, but that's a really important thing on the slate tonight. It'll also be very interesting to see how the market tracks that. Right now, we think, you know, the market isn't going to overplay the recent game logs, having Reynolds at 23% ownership and Woods at 38%. But with pricing being tight, I wouldn't be surprised if those projected ownerships ended up coming in a little bit closer to one another.
Oh, yeah. I think people are hip to Reynolds. There's been so much chatter on social this week. I think that Reynolds will probably end up more owned than Woods, and I would for sure say that would make Woods a better play. Josh Reynolds now leads the entire team in air yards share. I mean, so yeah, I think that's at least worth considering. Drew, anything on wide receivers before we move to tight end?
The thing I want to ask you, Adam, is the Rams have a fairly significant offensive line injury with Whitworth out, right? So do you think that means that we're going to see more 12 personnel tonight? And does that impact Josh Reynolds or Cooper Kupp seeing the field more substantially? Because I think one of the ways that teams often will try to overcompensate for the loss of a big time offensive lineman, especially on the outside of the tackle positions, is what they'll try to do is they'll try to bring in a little bit of extra help with some chipping and some guys kind of staying in. Do you foresee kind of a change in approach from the Rams tonight?
So I was going to bring this up when we got to tight end, because I think it's really likely that Higbee and Everett are both asked to stay in way more than they normally do. Andrew Whitworth, one of the best tackles in the entire league, and we know Jared Goff does not deal well with pressure at all. Bucks have one of the best pass rushers. So yes, I think the tight ends, are going to project better than they actually are tonight because of the downside of them staying into block. In terms of how often they go two tight end versus three wide receiver, I mean, they've been using, it's not the Sean McVay of the Super Bowl year where they exclusively played three wide receiver. They've been using two wide receiver reasonable amount anyways. Does this make them do so more? Maybe. I could see that for sure. We've seen Cooper Kupp come off the field at rates, and so I'm hesitant to say that it's definitely Josh Reynolds or definitely Woods the one that loses it. Kupp is the one in three wide that's been in the slot. So it's a good question. I'm low on
it's interesting because I think the narrative is going to be that if they're playing more two tight end sets, that means we should play more of the two tight ends. But what you're saying is, no, those guys are probably just in there to be extra help and extra protection. And that makes sense to me.
I think so. Man, I'm just not on the Rams pass game at all tonight. I think it's really going to be a struggle for them as a whole. But yeah, let's go to tight end, because I think we continue this tight end, this blocking conversation here, because Higbee and Everett have both been involved, and Everett is extremely cheap on the slate. Like I said, 2,600, one of the cheapest plays on the slate. I think Cam Akers would be the other skill player who is cheap that people are going to try to punt with. Leone, how are we projecting tight ends? How do we decipher between Gronk and Brait and Everett and Higbee and all these guys?
Yeah, it's difficult. Everett's role had been growing, but the last two games with Higbee back, Higbee's played more snaps. He doubled them up in targets last week. It's close, but that Everett price tag is really appealing to me. If you're playing in a smaller field type thing and you want more of a higher projection type lineup, I think Everett's viable. Obviously, there's the risks you mentioned about him staying into block a bit more, but if you can't discern which running back to play on the Rams, you can drop down $300 and sort of just play Everett, or even on the running back side, I guess you can play Akers and basically just say, hey, give me the cheapest of the bunch. And that's how I'll roll the dice. Gronk is obviously the cream of the crop as far as the tight ends go. I know you love hearing that, Adam. You're a big Gronk fan. But I still think you're hoping for a score with Gronk still. He's behind. He's probably fourth in this team in targets, and that's a team that's going to spread it out quite a bit. So you're talking a mid to low teens target share for Gronk. So it's nothing too exciting there.
All right. I think a lot of questions people have on Showdown, Drew, is when should I be using a kicker? When should I be using a defense? What types of slates? What type of roster constructions? What type of salary structures do I want to be using kickers and defense? Because the original thought is kickers don't have enough ceiling to win me a GPP. What size field can we use kickers in? We've actually seen kickers, I think, come in some winning lineups in the large field stuff, but I could be mistaken there. When do you use kickers or defense in your large field pools?
Yeah, so the thing that I like to think about with each game is essentially what is the scoring environment? And by scoring environment, I don't mean the total of the game between the two teams. I mean the available DraftKings points that are going to be there. And really what dictates the scoring environment, right, is how often teams are throwing. If teams run the ball a ton, when you have a running play, the only points that are accumulated on a running play are however many yards or if the player scores a touchdown. Whereas if you have a passing play, if it's a completed pass, you've got points to the quarterback, points to the wide receiver, and the PPR value especially jumps those points pretty substantially in a one-game sample. So I think if you anticipate this game being throw heavy, then you would want to avoid the kickers a little bit more because there's reception value in general. Now, the caveat to that is that's when pricing makes it so that the kickers aren't some of the only options to potentially even score points. And when you get some of these condensed offenses, and it's weird to think of the Bucs in a condensed offense sense, but the fact that the guys who are going to be on the field are all priced up. And it's kind of the same thing with the Rams. You get these situations where there's not enough skill player snaps below the prices of the kickers to really rack up points. And that's where you get into good kicker environments. The other way you get into good kicker environments are lower scoring games with a lot of running, where there's not going to be that kind of reception value. There's not going to be that random touchdown value that's going to generate things. And maybe a kicker getting 8 or 9 or something like that is cracking a lot of optimal lineups. And so this game, honestly, I think sets up pretty well for the kickers.
Mm-hmm. Leone, you brought up that tweet from Cody. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, he's looked at the captain selection by position, and the green bar is what top 1% of entries have done, and the black bar is what the total field has done. And essentially, the field's been pretty sharp in terms of captain selection, but you do see kickers are owned, half the time in the top 1% entries that the field's playing. It's not that the field's playing them much in captain, but the kicker captains don't have them that much. The field's also overplaying DST a little bit. So in captain, I think these are good flex plays. As Drew noted, I think particularly with the pricing on this slate and the volatility with some of the similar price skill players, that kicker makes a lot of sense in your flex. But be careful in captain. And receivers still, the field's getting sharper to it, but it still seems to be the spot where people aren't playing captain quite enough. And I think that makes sense. I do want to make sure to note that the Rams kicker situation, I believe, is not 100% decided. Right now, we think it's Matt Gay who is going to kick. # revenge game for Matt Gay, the old kicker revenge game. But there's been some talk that Austin McGinnis, who they have on their practice squad, could get called up. And, fake sharp Sean McVay says they know who their kicker is going to be, but they're not saying who it is because, nothing's going to screw up the Bucs quite like making them think about which kicker they're going to have to face tonight. Yeah,
exactly. Okay. Do we want to plant flags on this showdown slate or no? I think the people want it.
The suck up flag plant. So XJ price rates, and I'm praying for a suck up flag plant from Dink, and I think I can see it in his eyes. It's a good spot for a kicker flag plant. It's probably the only spot we'd have for a kicker flag plant all season, but that would not be my flag plant if forced to flag plant.
All right.
You are forced to flag plant, I think.
I'll go first, man. I'm going with the roommate narrative. To welcome a known psychopath into your home is essentially guaranteeing him targets, okay? So my flag plant is going to be Antonio Brown in this game. National TV, great spot for Brady to say, look, I was right. In that one New England game they had together, he threw him the ball like 9 times on 2 drives. This is a great spot for Jalen Ramsey to be on Mike Evans and Antonio Brown to see extreme amounts of targets per route run. So I'll go Antonio Brown.
I will go Leonard Fournette. I think he's just unlocks the slate a little bit tonight. We're talking about difficulties in finding cap relief. I really think you can captain Leonard Fournette, and that opens up all sorts of possibilities for your lineup. So I'm buying the pass catch role for Leonard Fournette. Do you want to note too, Adam, how you said you think the Rams really struggle in this game? Don't be afraid to make 5-1 onslaughts where you're playing 5 Tampa Bay Buccaneers and 1 Ram. The field is getting sharper to that in MME, but even in small field, that's something that's viable. I think people have a natural inclination to try and go 3-3 or 4-2 and balance out their lineups. But if you think it's a one-sided affair, don't be afraid to have that reflected in your lineups in a 5-1 construction.
Yeah, sure. And I would say the opposite as well, where you could consider a 5-1 construction. Remember that Saints-Bucks game on Primetime Showdown that we all thought was going to be kind of a competitive game, and then Brady, looked like he was 55 years old out there, and all of a sudden it's a totally different environment. The one thing that I'll say about that's a little bit different is the Rams just run the ball so much. If they're in that situation, that you still might get 2 Tampa Bay pass catchers kind of working their way into the lineups. You guys took kind of the 2 flag plants that I was going to look at. So I'm almost tempted to go the suck up route, but I am going to go a different route here. I will say I'd like to shout out Mike for trying to mush Leonard Fournette. We've got a high stakes season long sweat against Leonard Fournette tonight. So I appreciate the flag plant mush opportunity there, but I'm going to go with Robert Woods. And I'm going to flag plant saying Robert Woods scores a rushing touchdown tonight.
Yes. Bob Trees. That is one thing you get with Robert Woods. He does get those jet sweeps at least a couple times a game.
Nothing will tilt the people quite like a Robert Woods rushing touchdown to get him in the optimal lineups without Jared Goff.
It's happening.
Okay. All right. That's going to do it for this showdown opener of Black Friday week here at Established Run. Again, we have merch. We have sales, we have free shows. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell on YouTube. That is how we continue to feed our families with likes and subscribe buttons on YouTube. So for Drew, for Leone, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.